like this. Okay, so let's do a very quick review of some of the things we spoke about last week, because they're going to play a role in our discussion this week. If you recall, we quoted the Gemara in Shabbos, which spoke about a sequence of prohibitions that were instituted because of concern. So, for example, the Gemara says that initially it was technically, halachically, it's totally permitted to go ahead and bathe in water that was heated up before Shabbos. Okay, so you could go ahead and you could go to a bathhouse where they had a raging fire from before Shabbos. Everything's good. There would be no problem. The problem was that people would go ahead and these attendants would go ahead and they'd start the fire on Shabbos, right? They'd start the fire on Shabbos and they claim, oh, we just started the fire, we did this fire before Shabbos. And therefore, Jewish attendants, and even if they weren't Jewish, the concern was it's still going to be fire that was illegally done for Jews. Either way, it's going to be problematic, and therefore the rabbi said, not happening. Okay. Bottom line is, fine. That was more or less, so basically they made this prohibition against washing in hot water that was heated up before Shabbos, even hot water that was heated up before Shabbos, because of this concern. And then there's a discussion, about washing limb by limb or not, or less than the majority of your body with hot water. So there's really two tracks. If the water was heated up before Shabbos, let's say you had water that was put into a thermos, heated up before Shabbos, and you want to go ahead and wash your face and your hands, basically the minority of your body, look, you got a gift, look at this, the minority of your body, then to do so would be permitted, that would be permitted. So again, if you have hot water, let's say, keep it simple, it was put into a thermos, boiling hot water, put into a thermos, and then on Shabbos, you want to go ahead and use that hot water to wash your face, to wash your hair, to wash your hands, not the majority of your body, totally fine. Where there is a discussion, where there's a debate, is water that was heated legally on Shabbos. So for example, you take water out of your urn, okay, and you mix it together with cold water on Shabbos. The Mishnah Berurah said no, because that cold water was heated on Shabbos, even though it was done legally, you can't use it at all to wash your body, whereas Shmir Shabbos Kol Chasro and others say no, that water can be used on Shabbos. Okay, so the bottom line is, again, washing your entire body in water heated up before Shabbos, not allowed. Everyone agrees is not allowed. Washing a part of your body, and again, the reason for that was this decree based on the fact that people were gaming the system. They were pretending to be heating the water before Shabbos. Really, they were keeping the water on Shabbos, heating the water on Shabbos. Therefore, the rabbis made a general decree: no washing your body in hot water that's heated up before Shabbos. When it comes to limb by limb, if it was water heated before Shabbos, permitted. If it was water heated on Shabbos, that is a matter of debate. Okay.
Difference halachically of limb by limb as opposed to your whole body.
Basically, it's like this decree.
You would go to the bathhouse.
Seemingly, in other words, what's included in that decree? The decree is washing your body. Well, if it's not your body, because it's called washing your hands, meaning one is washing your body, i.e. the majority of your body, and one is not. So therefore, it just wasn't part of that general decree. And to your point, if you want to get a little more, the rational reason behind it is that, people want to go to the bathhouse to wash their hands. You go to the bathhouse to take a,
do your hands. According to the ones that do it limb by limb, you could do your hands, then you could do your
No, so their argument is that everyone would agree you can't do that. What you're allowed to do is the sum total has to be the minority of your body. Once you're washing the whole body, even limb by limb.
I didn't catch that.
Okay, so meaning the point is that once you're washing the majority of your body, that's part of that decree of washing your body. If you're just washing your hands and your feet, that's a minority of your body, no problem.
That makes more sense.
Okay, good.
I was supposed to mention to you about pool.
Mm-hmm. Not ready for that yet. We still have to go through cold water, but God willing, we'll come back to pools. Thank you. Well, we'll get to pools. So today what I want to do is they have these interesting. We used to skip them in the past, but they're worth going through. These really articles on going a little bit deeper onto some of the topics that we've been discussing. So if you jump to page 60, it's an article all in English. It's going to take a little unpacking. It's going to run through a bunch of Gemaras, but really what he wants to address over here is how does this relate to Yom Tov? Okay, I've given shiurim here in the past about bathing on Yom Tov or showering on Yom Tov. It's worth going through the sources. You'll see, as I hope I made clear, it wasn't so simple. This is the way that I tell people they can act. But as we'll see, it's a complicated sugya. It's a very complicated topic, and so we're going to go through this article together. It's an article on this topic of showering on Yom Tov. Based on our information that we learned about Shabbos, we're now going to apply that information. How does it relate to Yom Tov? Now, in Yom Tov, so let's go through the sources and. Sorry? Yes, and we're going to see, where does that come from? Where does this idea come from on Yom Tov you're allowed to use hot water? And we'll see there may be some limitations, and that's what we're going to get into right now. So let's read it line by line and elaborate when I feel the need to, but feel free to interject if any questions arise. Okay, in today's times, so we're on page 60, unlike in previous generations, common practice of most people is to shower daily. Nevertheless, it would seem that the halacha forbids taking a shower on Yom Tov. When a Chag arrives the last 2 days, right, every Chag in Chutz La'aretz, outside of Israel, and Rosh Hashanah in Israel, and particularly when it's followed by Shabbos, what we call a 3-day Yom Tov. It's a funny term. It's not really a 3-day Yom Tov, right? It's a 2-day Yom Tov and a Shabbos, but it sounds good, okay? We encounter a halacha quandary. Is there any room to allow showering based on the normative changes in hygiene habits and the distress that will be caused by not doing so? This essay will attempt to clarify the major halachic principles involved in this question, okay? So that is our agenda. Here we go. Okay, although all 39 melachos prohibited on Shabbos are also prohibited on Yom Tov. Okay, so generally speaking, whatever you can't do on Shabbos, you can't do on Yom Tov. The Torah distinguishes between the two by saying that on Yom Tov, but what is eaten by any person, that alone may be done for you. Okay, so the Torah says that when it comes to what is called ochel nefesh, when it comes to things about eating, that the Torah allows on Yom Tov, okay? That is the only thing the Torah says. It says, you can't do any malacha on Yom Tov, you can't do any work. If you can't use your phone on Shabbos, you can't use your phone on Yom Tov. If you can't turn on a light on Shabbos, you can't turn on a light on Yom Tov. But if it's needed for eating, that you're allowed to do, okay? And the question is going to be, how wide-ranging is this, okay? The Torah thus gives us a special dispensation that all malachos needed for ochel nefesh, for eating, are permitted on Yom Tov. This is highlighted by the Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Maseches Beitza, which states that the only difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov pertains to activities performed for the sake of ochel nefesh. We'll translate the term ochel nefesh at this stage as any malacha, any otherwise prohibited work needed for food preparation. This means that kneading, cooking, and baking, for example, would be permitted on Yom Tov. Okay, so you just said the Torah alone, it would tell you, whereas on Shabbos you can't go ahead and bake a cake, whereas on Shabbos you can't go ahead and knead the dough, whereas on Shabbos you can't go ahead and cook. On Yom Tov you could do those things, yes.
Isn't it, I mean, that's how they're translating it, but is that a strange, wouldn't you say, sorry, ochel? I mean, ochel nefesh is...
Yeah, it's the term the Torah uses. It's a term, he's just quoting the term, the term.
I know that's the term, but doesn't the term itself lend itself to a more expansive definition than just food?
Could be, and some take that road. So we'll come back to that. Yeah, this leniency of ochel nefesh would seemingly not apply to heating water other than for purposes of eating or drinking. Right? In other words, if you just had this pasuk, it says the only malacha you could do, the only work you could do on Yom Tov is for eating. Well, I want to wash my hands. Can I heat up water? No, because why am I washing? If you're washing your hands to prepare food, maybe. But if you're just washing your hands because you want to wash your hands, you want to wash your feet, not for eating, right? Because you just want to wash your feet, that should not be included in this allowance because it says ochel nefesh. Nevertheless, the Mishnah in Maseches Beitza states, Beis Shammai states that it is prohibited to heat water to wash one's feet unless it is fit to be drunk. Yet, Beis Hillel permits this. So we have this Mishnah in Maseches Beitza, which tells us that Beis Hillel says even though the Torah only allows heating water, doing any of these things for food purposes, Beis Hillel says it could be done even for washing one's hands and feet. And obviously we have to ask ourselves, why? Where does he get this from? All the Torah says you could do activity for food purposes. Washing my feet is not about food, I would assume, right? So let's read further. We're on page 61. The Mishnah relates 2 points. Beis Shammai prohibit malacha performed to attain hot water for the purpose of bathing, while Beis Hillel permit this. And number 2, very important for us, Beis Hillel's leniency is limited to heating water only to wash one's feet, hands, and face. Right? When Beis Hillel says you can heat up water, he doesn't say you can heat up water and go take a bath. He says you can heat up water and wash your hands, feet, and face. Okay, we'll have to come back to why. Okay? At first glance, it would seem that Beis Shammai is correct. The Torah never allows malacha other than for eating purposes. How then can it be permitted to heat water in order to bathe? Another question to be asked is based on the fact that Beis Hillel seems to agree with Beis Shammai that it would be forbidden to heat water to wash one's entire body and were lenient only to wash one's face, hands, and feet. If heating water to bathe is permitted, then why is there a limitation? Right? Those are the 2 things we have to address. A, where does Beis Hillel get this idea that I could heat up water for a non-food purpose? And B, where does he get this limitation from? Bathing, no. Hands, feet, yes. Where does that come from? The Gemara does not explain Beis Hillel's position. Neither why they permit heating for non-food purposes, nor the reason for the limitation to face, hands, and feet. 2 major approaches are taken by the Rishonim in order to explain the opinion of Beis Hillel. The Rishonim are the sages, are scholars, are leaders who live between more or less the year 1000 to 1500. Those include Rashi, Rambam, Tosfos. Okay, so we're going to share different views, which are going to have different ramifications. So first he begins with the opinion of Tosfos, Ran, and Rush. Those are all major Rishonim, major commentators, and they discuss this principle called mitoch. Okay, we'll explain what it means in a second. While clarifying the opinion of Beis Shammai, Tosfos reveal the reason behind Beis Hillel's logic. They explain that the disagreement between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai stems from whether one accepts the principle of mitoch, which is literally translated as since, meaning, since a malacha is permitted on Yom Tov for the sake of preparing food, it is also permitted for the sake of any other Yom Tov need. Okay, meaning, Beis Shammai says, the Torah says you could do this malacha, this work, for eating. Period. Done. Beis Hillel says, if you could do a certain type of work for eating, since it could be done for eating, I could do it for other things as well. Okay? It's a big leap. But that is the principle called mitoch. There's like a certain logical construct that says that in as much as I could do this, once the Torah permits me to do this activity for eating, it's actually saying I'm allowed to do this activity for other things as well. And that's the idea behind Beis Hillel. He's going to...
What about the limitation?
Hold on. We'll see. Good. We'll have to see what the limitation is all about. But this principle is illustrated in the following Mishnah. The Mishnah states, Beis Shammai forbid carrying a child, lulav, or sefer Torah in the public domain on Yom Tov, while Beis Hillel permits it. Okay? So carrying is something we cannot do on Shabbos, when there's no Erev, right? We're spoiled. We have an Erev we could carry more or less anywhere we walk, on Shabbos, okay? If there's no Erev, you should not be allowed, you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. Beis Hillel says, on Yom Tov, Beis Shammai says, you can't carry. What you could carry is a loaf of bread to eat at your friend's house, because that's for ochel nefesh, that's for eating. But when it comes to a lulav, when it comes to a child, when it comes to your book, that's not for food purposes, and therefore Beis Shammai says you cannot do it. Beis Hillel says, no, you're allowed to do it. Why? The Gemara explains. Since mitoch, the malach of carrying is overridden for the purpose of food, it is also overridden and permitted to carry for non-food purposes. Okay, so here we have clearly Beis Hillel says, once a prohibited activity is permitted for eating purposes, that malacha gets permitted for, I'm not going to say all purposes, but for other purposes as well. And therefore, when it comes to carrying, which on Yom Tov, everyone would agree I'm allowed to carry bread, I'm allowed to carry food without an Erev because I need that food to eat, Beis Hillel says, since I'm allowed to do it for eating, I'm allowed to do it for non-eating. Good? So far, so good?
How do they
Carry food to eat, like,
I'm going to your house as a guest, and you asked me to bring the challah, right? So how are you going to have challah? So I go ahead, I carry there's no Erev here today, and it's Yom Tov, and I go ahead and I carry my bread to your house so that we can have bread. That's carrying for eating.
yeah, but why don't you just prepare that?
You could have, but that's fine. You could have baked, but the Torah, when it says you're allowed to bake and knead on Shabbos, if you want to bake on knead on Shabbos, you'd be allowed to, right? I could have done it before. Generally speaking, there are limitations to that, but generally speaking, the Torah says I'm allowed to do things for food purposes. So carrying my bread, that is clearly for food purpose. You're right. It's a fair question. Maybe I should have done it before. That might have some halachic ramifications,
Just
but
trying to figure out what point, which I'm sure you're getting to, there's this cut off.
well, right now this is for food purposes, no question.
You say everything is for food purposes.
My sefer on Meseches Psachim has nothing to do with food purposes. I'm not eating my book, and therefore that is clearly meaning there might be some things in the middle, but bringing some food for a meal is for eating purposes. Bringing a book to read is not eating purposes. Beis Shammai would say I'm allowed to bring a bread to eat, and I would not be allowed to bring a book. Beis Hillel would say no, since I can carry the bread, I can carry the book. Yeah, you're gonna
Is
ask.
that as radical as it seems? That
It's a pretty radical principle. It's a pretty radical principle in terms of what's the rationale behind this.
the fact that we all accept it is pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing. But thank God it's Beis Hillel, and we get to rely on him. Thank God for him.
You could easily say, oh, well, I need the recipe from the cookbook.
Okay, so maybe that would be. Okay, we don't have to get into the details, but we'd all agree there are things like a Gemara. Everyone's going to agree is not a cookbook, and everyone's going to agree. Beis Shammai would say that's forbidden. Beis Hillel would say no problem permitted. Where the parameters are not for our.
You could say, oh, I need to go and know this halacha regarding cooking.
Not if it's about karbanos. No, everyone would. You're right. We can have practical discussions, but everyone's going, about where to draw the line. But everyone's going to agree. There's cases we could all understand. There's going to be cases where Beis Shammai would say not a chance. If you have a Gemara that has nothing to do with eating, of course that has nothing that you can't do that on Shabbos according on Yom Tov. Carry it on Yom Tov according to Beis Shammai. So we'll say no problem, even though it has nothing to do with eating. We'd all agree there's going to be those examples. Where are the examples in the middle? Good. a larger discussion for another time. Good. Beis Shammai does not accept the principle of mitoch and therefore prohibits heating water for non-eating purposes, while Beis Hillel does accept mitoch and therefore permits it. Furthermore, Tosfos explained that the principle of mitoch is also the basis for the limitation that Beis Hillel ascribes to. Okay, so now we're going to answer question number 2. In other words, so wait a second. Beis Hillel says mitoch. Mitoch means in as much as I could heat up water to go ahead and cook something for dinner on Yom Tov, I could also heat up water for my hands and feet. But we said, wait a second. But then, if once I heat up water for my hands and feet, why can't I heat up water to bathe my whole body? So let's keep on reading. Says Tosfos, okay, and this is what Tosfos is getting at. The Talmud discusses whether one may consummate a wedding on Friday night, even though this would violate the malacha of chabura. Okay, so there's a discussion, Maseches Ksubis, about whether or not a wedding, back in the day, weddings would actually oftentimes take place on Friday. It sounds like I can't imagine anything more stressful. But back in the day, weddings would take...
Great. I've been to a few of them.
Everyone just chills after.
They just chill. They go right into Friday night dinner.
Okay, I still get, conniptions thinking about it. But okay, bottom...
Have to go home.
Right. Bottom line is, this is quite popular, quite common, and there's a halachic question that comes up. Assuming this is the woman's first time being intimate, there's a question of creating a wound, which would not be allowed on Shabbos, and therefore there's a question if the husband and wife are allowed to consummate their marriage on Friday nights. Okay, within the discussion, the Gemara brings an argument between Rav Papi and Rav Papa. I know they sound similar. Two people, similar names, as to Rava's opinion. Rav Papi holds that Rava permits consummating the wedding both on Shabbos and on Yom Tov, while Rav Papa holds that Rava permits only on Yom Tov, but not on Shabbos. Okay? One says you could, no problem, both on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and one says only on Yom Tov. Okay, page 62. Rav Papi then challenges Rav Papa. Is your opinion based on the principle of mitoch? Since it's permitted to slaughter for food preparation, therefore this malacha, which is causing bleeding, would be permitted for non-food purposes as well? If that is true regarding consummating a marriage, then by the same logic, okay, so let's pause. In other words, the assumption in the argument is, are you saying that the reason it's allowed is because of the principle of mitoch? In other words, the reason that it would be allowed is that in as much as you could cause bleeding for the sake of slaughtering food, there be, what's the prohibition against, normally against slaughtering an animal? One of the prohibitions is causing blood, okay, causing a wound, and therefore in mitoch, since that malacha of causing blood could be done for eating purposes, it could be done for other purposes as well. If that's the case, he says, if this is true regarding consummating a marriage, then by the same logic, it should be permitted to burn incense in order to fragrance one's house, which the Gemara takes for granted as being forbidden. He says, wait a second, if you want to tell me the principle of mitoch applies, and that's why it's permitted to consummate the marriage on Yom Tov, then why do we have a tradition that burning incense is forbidden on Shabbos? In other words, you could go ahead and make a fire to cook your roast on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, But the Talmud tells us that you cannot go ahead and burn incense on Yom Tov. Why not? If the principle of mitoch is a valid principle, then we should say, in as much as I could go ahead and cook a stew on Shabbos, I should be able to go ahead and burn incense. Burning incense was quite common. Nowadays we have like Febreze and fresheners that spew, smell, whatever. Back in the day, they would burn incense. Why does the Talmud tell us you cannot burn incense? Rav Papa answers, and here's the key line, even if you didn't follow until now, this is the key line, that the two cases cannot be compared, as burning incense is an act that is not shaveh lechol nefesh, meaning it is not a need for the average person. Okay, what does that mean? What that means, okay, bear with me, is that this idea of mitoch has a certain limitation. When we say mitoch, that I'm allowed to, or even general malacha that I'm allowed to do on Yom Tov, is only going to be malacha that is shaveh lechol nefesh. That is something which is a need by most people, okay, as opposed to something which is only done by the elite, or only done by an exclusive group of people. Back in the day, incense was done, but only by the really, really wealthy people. The regular people, it smells bad. Guess what? The old world, not so old world, stunk. It was a terrible, terrible stench everywhere, and you just dealt with it. The really, really wealthy people, they had incense burning everywhere. And what the Gemara is telling us is that the principle of mitoch will not permit something like incense, because even though mitoch, since I could burn a fire for the sake of cooking, I should be able to burn incense. No, because it's not something which is universal. We don't allow that. Basically, what comes out of this Gemara is that there's this principle within the allowances of what you can do on Yom Tov. There's a limitation. It has to be something which is shaveh lechol nefesh. It has to be something which is seen as a universal benefit, and something which would be like strange and bizarre for some people, parts of the population, not allowed. From this discussion, an important principle can be formulated. Even the opinion that subscribes to the leniency of mitoch agrees that this leniency is limited to actions that are shaveh l'chol nefesh, we're on page 62, a need for the average person. Based on this principle, Tosfos explain, now we come back to our Gemara, Tosfos explain the limitation of Beis Hillel. The Gemara understood that washing one's entire body is not considered shaveh l'chol nefesh, as opposed to washing one's hands, face, and feet, which everyone does. Right? You have to keep in mind. Back in the day, how often did they bathe their entire body? Not very often. Okay? And therefore, when Beis Hillel applies the principle of mitoch and says that I'm allowed to go ahead and heat up water on Yom Tov to wash myself, he does not allow washing the whole body, because who washes their body on a daily basis? That's bizarre. That's absurd. That's even crazier than burning incense in your house. Nobody does that. To wash your hands and feet, okay, if you had hot water, anyone would wash their hands and feet on a regular basis, and therefore that is allowed, says Beis Hillel, but bathing your whole body is not shaveh l'chol nefesh, and therefore not allowed. In summary, the ruling of Beis Hillel regarding heating water for washing appears to be as follows. It is permitted to heat water for bathing, even though this does not qualify as ochel nefesh. I'm not eating the water, I'm not drinking the water, based on the principle of mitoch. However, the allowance is limited to heating water for purposes that are shaveh l'chol nefesh. It has to be universal. This includes only heating water for one's face, hands, and feet, as opposed to heating to wash one's entire body, which is not considered a need of the average person. This is how the Rush and the Ran explain the position of Beis Hillel. Okay, pause. Makes sense? Okay, so basically what we have over here is the reason Beis Hillel allows heating up water on Yom Tov to wash one's hands, feet, and face, and not the entire body, is because the principle of mitoch allows doing a malacha for non-food purposes, just like I could carry a Gemara, which has nothing to do with eating, on Yom Tov, even without an Erev, no problem, because of the principle of mitoch, but it has to be limited to something which is universally seen as a need. Washing one's entire body, Beis Hillel says, no, nobody does that, or no one does it on a regular basis, and therefore not a universal need. Washing your hands and feet, that is a universal need, and that's why he limits it to washing your hands and feet. That's how Tosfos and the Rush and the Ran understand that Gemara as to why Beis Hillel allows washing one's hands and feet. Cyril, do you have a question? No. Okay. Let's see now another view, another interpretation of that Gemara. The Rambam proposes a radically different explanation of Beis Hillel. He writes in Hilchos Yom Tov, washing and anointing are included in eating and drinking. Okay, and one is permitted to do so on Yom Tov, as the verse states, but what is eaten by one person, that alone may be done for you. This includes all the needs of the body. And I think, Karen, this is what you're getting at. Ochel nefesh does not only mean ochel. If it would just be about food, the Torah should have said eating, but it uses this broader term. And Beis Hillel, according to the Rambam, understands that included in the allowance to go ahead and warm things up and do malachos is any needs of the body. Bathing or washing your hands and feet is a need of the body. The Rambam asserts that the term ochel nefesh refers to any bodily need, as opposed to Tosfos' more limiting understanding of needs regarding preparation and consumption of food. Based on this understanding, it is clear why Beis Hillel permitted heating water for washing, but why, according to the Rambam, did Beis Hillel limit this leniency to hands, feet, and face? The Rambam continues as follows, but to wash one's entire body would be prohibited. Why? Because of the rabbinic decree regarding the bathhouses. This brings us to last week's class. Remember, the rabbis came along and said those bathhouse attendants were a bunch of not good people, right? And they basically were going ahead and pretending that they were heating up the water, on before Shabbos. Really, they were heating it up on Shabbos. The rabbis came along and said, no bathing on Shabbos in the bathhouses, and they made this general decree. How wide-reaching was their decree? Okay, some understand their decree was limited to Shabbos. The Rambam says no. Their decree included Yom Tov, and that's why he says, really, from the Torah says, ochel nefesh, according to the Rambam, I should be allowed to wash my entire body because it's part of a bodily need, no problem. Why can't I wash my entire body? Because of a Shabbos decree, which includes Yom Tov, the Shabbos decree which we spoke about last week, which said that we were afraid of these crooks. Therefore, that includes Yom Tov as well. You're also not allowed to wash your body on an entire body on Yom Tov because of that general decree. Okay? So those are two views as to how to understand Beis Hillel, and now we're going to see how this, we'll move this a little bit further. So far, so good? With me still? Okay, it's a lot, but I think we're getting like a real deep dive into this discussion, which in the past I know we've had a very, surface level type of discussion. Okay, so let's go further. Next paragraph. In order to understand this limitation of the Rambam, let us briefly introduce the rabbinic decree regarding bathhouses. To us, it's not an introduction. To us, it's going to be a review because we just learned this. The Talmud relates that the bathhouse attendants would heat the water before Shabbos for people to go and bathe on Shabbos, page 63. When it became known that the tenants were actually heating the water on Shabbos, the sages forbade bathing completely, even if the water was heated before Shabbos. Okay, the Talmud explicitly states this decree applies to bathing on Shabbos, but does not clarify whether this decree also applied to Yom Tov. Here, there are two considerations that need to be explored. Assuming that biblically it is permitted to bathe one's entire body on Yom Tov, as the Rambam explains, we'll need to clarify whether, regarding Yom Tov, whether there was a rabbinic decree not to bathe one's entire body, similar to the decree regarding Shabbos. Okay, so according to the Rambam, do we say, which seemingly we say, that it's the same decree that we have on Shabbos, we have on Yom Tov? And two, even if there is a rabbinic decree not to bathe on Yom Tov, would this apply to heating with water that was heated before Yom Tov, as it applies to water heated before Shabbos? Remember, according to what happened on regarding Shabbos, the rabbis came along and said you cannot use water even if it was heated before Shabbos, right? Because of this concern of people acting inappropriately, right? So even if the water was heated before Shabbos, you can't go ahead and use that water, right? And okay, so maybe there is some decree about Yom Tov, but what's the decree about Yom Tov? Is the decree that on Yom Tov you can't use water that was heated on Yom Tov? Even though, according to the Rambam, technically, you are allowed to do so. Right? Again, according to the Rambam, if you were to ask the Rambam, before the rabbis come along, we just had a verse in the Torah that says, I could do things for ochel nefesh. I could do anything that's beneficial for my body. Would I be allowed to go ahead and heat up water, have a fire, pre-existing fire? I could take a big cold, bucket and put it over the fire to heat it up to bathe my entire body. According to the Rambam, would I be allowed to do so? 100%. Okay? So when the rabbis, but the rabbis came along and said, there's a decree based on the Shabbos decree. But how far did they go in including Yom Tov in the Shabbos decree? Did they include heating up water on Yom Tov in the Shabbos decree? Or did they also include heating up water even before Yom Tov in the Shabbos decree? We know on Shabbos you can't use water that was heated up even before Shabbos, right? When they said Yom Tov's included, did they say Yom Tov's identical to Shabbos? Or did they say Yom Tov's partially included in this decree? And saying that you're only not allowed to use water that's heated up on Yom Tov, even though technically, biblically, you should be allowed to. But water heated up before Yom Tov should be allowed. Yes? Yeah? Question? No?
Did they specify? If they didn't specify, why would we assume one or the other?
None of it's specified, and that's part of the problem. We know the Rambam comes along and tells us, it's included this decree. So the Rambam is forced, he's forced to say this based on his understanding. Why he has to reject Tosfos is another discussion, but he's forced to say that Beis Hillel's view is because of this decree, but the Gemara says nothing about Yom Tov, but the Rambam clearly extends it. The Rambam is the one who says that.
Well, I understand if they didn't say it, you would assume that it would be included the whole thing. So why would you assume otherwise if they didn't specify?
Okay. So says the Rambam. The Rambam states categorically, I'm responding, that the rabbinic decree applies to Yom Tov as well. However, if the water is heated on an Erev Yom Tov, one may wash one's entire body with it, as the sages did not enact such a decree regarding Yom Tov. So the Rambam disagrees. The Rambam says, yeah, you're right. It doesn't specify. But keep in mind, the Gemara doesn't specify anything about Yom Tov. You can look at the footnote for a little bit more elaboration. We're not going to get into it right now. But the bottom line is the Rambam says there was a decree about Yom Tov, but only a decree about heating up the water on Yom Tov itself, but water heated up before Yom Tov. Basically, the Rambam says that would be too far-reaching of a decree. Okay, again, you can read this footnote. He goes into a little bit more detail. Okay, let's go further. If it's biblically permitted to eat water on Yom Tov in order to wash one's entire body, why would Chazal forbid it? Okay, then, so says the Rif and Rambam, understand that they were worried that if this were permitted, then people would come to eat water on Shabbos as well, right? In other words, the whole idea, according to the Rambam, is it's all part of the general decree of people going ahead and illegally heating water on Shabbos. However, if the water was heated on Erev Yom Tov, they did permit it, since heating water to wash one's entire body, according to his opinion, is only rabbinically prohibited, out of concern for Shabbos, then forbidding bathing in water heated on Erev Yom Tov would constitute a decree regarding a rabbinic decree, which the sages generally avoided. We can now summarize Rambam's understanding of the approach of Beis Hillel as follows. Although from the Torah it is permitted to heat water to wash one's entire body on Yom Tov, nonetheless the sages forbade it, both heating and washing with that water, lest one come to heat water on Shabbos. If the water was heated on Erev Yom Tov, then the Rambam maintains that there is no rabbinic prohibition of bathing with this water, as the sages made no such decree regarding Yom Tov. Okay, one more principle, and then we're going to get to practical law. I know it's a lot. You all still with me? It's good that we're reading this all in English, right? Because this is a lot of information. Okay, the Rush argues that the Gemara equates Shabbos and Yom Tov completely. Therefore, even if the water was heated on Erev Yom Tov, it would be prohibited to bathe on Yom Tov. Okay, so whereas we just had the Rambam who's distinguished, who said that the decree against bathing in one's entire body, that is only with water heated up on Yom Tov, but not on Erev not water heated on Erev Yom Tov. The Rush disagrees and says when they included this decree of not using, the bathhouse decree, they included Yom Tov and treated it exactly like Shabbos. And in as much as on Erev Shabbos, you can't use water that was heated on Erev Shabbos, so too on Yom Tov, you would not be allowed to use water that was heated on Erev Yom Tov. You with me still? Okay, he explains as follows. Since heating water on Yom Tov for one's entire body is not Shavuot L'Kol, Nefesh, and is therefore a Torah violation, it makes sense that it would be prohibited rabbinically to use water heated Erev Yom Tov, lest people come to eat water on Yom Tov. The logic here is exactly the same as the Gzera regarding Erev Shabbos. This is not Gzera or Gzera. Okay, let's just summarize. Let's come to the next paragraph. To summarize the opinions discussed thus far, we have seen that there is a machlokes rishonim, a debate amongst the earliest commentators regarding 3 different points relating to Beis Hillel's opinion of bathing on Yom Tov. And here's the summary in case you missed it all. Number 1, according to Tosfos, heating water, even for one's face, is not included in the definition of ochel nefesh and is only permitted on the principle of mitoch. Right? View number 1 says the Torah only permits things for food. However, there is this concept called mitoch and says even if it's not for food, it can be done for other purposes. According to the Rambam, heating water for one's face or the entire body is included in the leniency of ochel nefesh. Whereas according to the Rambam, no. When the Torah says I could do things for ochel nefesh, I'm already allowed to do anything for my body. Number 2, according to Tosfos, the Rush and the Ran, there's a Torah violation of heating water on Yom Tov in order to wash one's entire body. Okay, there'd be a biblical violation to heat water on Yom Tov to wash one's entire body, since it's not something which everyone could do, and therefore it falls into the general prohibition of not doing malacha. According to the Rambam and the Rif, this is permitted biblically, but prohibited rabbinically, lest one come to eat water on Shabbos. According to Tosfos and the Rush, water heated on Erev Yom Tov is forbidden to use by rabbinic decree. According to the Rambam and the Rif, it would be permitted to bathe using this water heated on Erev Yom Tov on Yom Tov. Okay, a lot of opinions. Who do we rule like? How do we rule? Let's see. Says the Shulchan Aruch, rules that one may not heat water on Yom Tov to wash one's entire body. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch rules very clearly. On Yom Tov, you cannot go ahead and turn on your hot water tap in order to wash your entire body. Okay, you could turn on your hot water if you're washing your hands. For an Netilas Yadayim in the morning, you could turn on the hot water, no problem. That's just your hands. But to turn on the hot water to wash your entire body cannot be done. However, if the water was heated before Yom Tov, it would be permitted to wash on Yom Tov. Okay, so if you somehow had this large thermos or something like that, where you had water heated before Yom Tov, you'd be allowed to use that water, or even maybe your urn, according to some, because the water was heated before Yom Tov, you'd be allowed to take that water out and just use it directly, let it cool down a little bit, but you'd be allowed to use that water on Yom Tov to wash your whole body. The Rama argues that even if the water was heated before Yom Tov, it would still be prohibited to wash. The Rama is even more stringent. The Rama goes with the more stringent views and says that even if the water was heated up before Yom Tov began, okay, the water was heated before Yom Tov. So let's say you had a water urn filled with hot water, or you have your boiler and you turn your boiler off, so it's not heating up anything new, it just maintains the heat. The Rama says you cannot use the water to heat your entire body. It seems the Shulchan Aruch rules in accordance with the Rambam, and the Rama rules in accordance with Tosfos. Okay, so basically, if you were just to stop reading the Shulchan Aruch, you would come out, certainly according to Ashkenazim, let's say even Sfardim. Sfardim would allow, the Shulchan Aruch is how Sfardim typically rule, Sfardim would allow bathing your entire body if you heated the water before Yom Tov. Not so practical for us, because you're not typically heating up, again, your boiler downstairs is constantly releasing water or heating up new water, so that's not really what we're talking about. But theoretically, if you had hot water heated up before Yom Tov, you could use that to wash your entire body, and the Rama says, nothing to it. Even if you heat it up before Yom Tov, you cannot bathe your entire body, like as Tosfos said. The only thing you're allowed to do is wash your hands and feet, or a minority of your body, but not your entire body. What's the reason for his limitation? It's not Shaveh Lakol. It's not universal. It is not a universal need. That's what Beis Hillel said. Beis Hillel said, to wash your hands and feet, that's universal. To wash your entire body, who does that? And therefore it's not allowed. Now, obviously you're asking yourself the question, well, I'll tell you who does that. I do that, and you do that, and we all do that, because things have changed. And that's the next point we're now going to address. What happens when things change? What happens when there's a universal practice at one point in time and it no longer is universal practice? How does that impact halacha? So says this article, is there any room to be lenient today with the prohibition to heat water to bathe on Yom Tov? According to the Rama, heating water on Yom Tov would be a Torah violation. This is because washing one's entire body is not considered Shaveh L'Kol. In today's time, where most people shower daily, or at least every other day, should this now be considered Shaveh L'Kol Nefesh? The answer would seem to be dependent on whether the definition of Shaveh L'Kol Nefesh is subject to change based on the normative standards of the day. The Magen Avram writes that although the Rama permits washing a baby, as this was Shaveh L'Kol Nefesh, in his day, this was not the usual practice, and he therefore prohibited it. So you see, the Magen Avram says, even though something was Shaveh L'Kol in the past, it's no longer Shaveh L'Kol, and therefore now it's no longer universal, and therefore now it's forbidden. Okay, this clearly implies that the nature of Sholach al-Nefesh is subject to change. However, what could you argue? That that's a stringency. There it's going in the opposite direction. There was a practice that was universal. Back in the day, infants had to be bathed daily, okay? Nowadays, well, you want, yes, no, whatever, they don't get so dirty, who knows, they didn't spit up today, fine. It's not seen as universals. Therefore, the Magen Avraham says that even though it used to be Shavuot Lakal, it's no longer Shavuot Lakal, and therefore you can no longer do it. But that's a stringency in Shavuot Lakal, right? Would we say the same regarding leniencies? The Pri Megadim writes that in his day, since smoking was considered normal practice, he's writing this a few hundred years ago, okay, yeah, and was used for medical reasons, okay, keep in mind, not that long ago, you had doctors saying, this is the healthiest cigarettes, right? People saw cigarettes very differently than we do nowadays. It was permitted as it had become Shavuot Lakal Nefesh. Today, smoking, he argues, would be clearly prohibited, both during weekdays, okay, and on Yom Tov, as the reasons have been proven medically incorrect, okay? It is clear from the source and others that the principle of Shavuot Lakal Nefesh changes according to societal norms, even if the outcome is a leniency. Based on this, one can make a strong argument that even Tosfos and the Ramah would permit showering in today's times. In other words, if we say that Shavuot Lakal, even that universal practices, we will say that if they change for a more lenient fashion, we will adopt a leniency, whereas in times of Beis Hillel, 2,000 years ago almost, they wash their hands and feet, washing a body would be absurd. But now it's universal, therefore we could say, well, now it's universal, it should be allowed. However, other poskim argue that Shavuot Lakal Nefesh is not subject to change. Not on Shabbos.
No, I've seen on Shabbos. I don't understand.
Okay, you may have seen it, but it's not. There's no posting in the world that will say you can smoke on Shabbos. I'm just telling you, there's no posting in the world. I can't tell you what people do, but there's no such thing. Okay, according to there are those who rely on certain leniencies for Yom Tov, but it's a stretch. According to this opinion, although most people shower daily, this just means that there are more mifunakim, pampered people today. But this does not transform into a necessity. This in and of itself is a nuanced understanding of Shalom Nefesh as referring to normative necessity and not a normative general practice. Moreover, even those poskim there theoretically. Yeah, I'm gonna summarize because I think we're gonna run out of time. I just want to make sure we get to the end, and I will recap. Moreover, even those poskim that theoretically accept the notion that Shavuot Lakal Nefesh is subject to change did not apply this leniency to showering. Okay, so what he wants to say is that there is a built-in allowance of something. He said that we are all showering. Is that because it's universal need, or do we actually? Is there something like almost like broken within us? You know, or do we all just become pampered people? All those who want to shower are pampered people, but it's not necessarily a need. In other words, we like someone would say, nowadays the average house size is like doubled from like 1960s or something, right? I don't mean in Pikesville. I mean like in the world. Like, it's just gone bigger, right? It's gone larger. Okay, so is that a need? Is that a need that now people need that, or just become like spoiled, right? And therefore this becomes like psychologically this becomes like a necessity. It's a very fine line how to define these things, right? Because we could go to Mea She'arim or to some slums in India or whatever, and basically people are living in huts that are the size of this table, right? So is this a need? I don't know, right? These things are a little bit hard to define. Do you say that this is really a Shavuot Lakal? That's what he's getting at in this paragraph. He packed a lot into this paragraph, but that's the basic point that he's getting at. Is it that this is really a universal need, or did we just get spoiled but it's not really a need? Do we really need to be showering all that often? Why can't we just spare ourselves with like Axe, like they do in some countries in Europe or whatever, and basically overcome their stench? Yes?
I mean, this is a slightly different question, but like for someone who doesn't shower every day, even if it is allowed because generally enough people do, is it an individual thing or is it universal?
It would be, they would be able to rely on the universal thing. Yeah. Okay. So he says, so basically points out that although we have this Pri Megadim, who says that maybe we could even go to lenient fashion, not everyone agrees to it necessarily. And even if they do, would showering be included? Can we say definitively that this is a change to now being a universal need, or is there something not broken, but is it based on like a distorted view of hygiene, that's why we now shower, but it's not necessarily a need, okay? This sounds, again, these are fine lines to define, how do you define a need? How do you define something which is, based on some distortion or something like that? But that's basically what he's getting at, saying that therefore showering is not, and he points out also that many major poskim, even over the past few decades, did not weigh in leniently about showering. Many poskim were silent about it, even though showering became much more common over the past, 50, 60 years on a regular, probably 100, I don't know exactly when, but it became much more common to be done on a more regular basis. You don't find the poskim over this time really weighing in and saying, oh, now things have changed. So there's silence One of my teachers, Rav Ezra Neuberger, who passed away just this past week, used to have a line that used to say whenever a commentator did not weigh in on anything, he'd say the silence is deafening. The silence is deafening. He always had a way with words. But basically his point is that when they don't weigh in, why are they not weighing in? This is a regular occurrence, and therefore sometimes their silence is actually implying that they actually are not allowing such a thing. Yes?
So, okay, I don't want to open another can of worms, but so with certain things with women, how long your sleeves are, there's a concept of minhag hamako. That's based on normative practice, not opposed to
Correct.
sorech.
Correct,
right?
correct. You're right. That is a completely separate track. When it comes to certain elements of there's two tracks within the laws of modesty. One is seen as an objective tract, and one is a societal track. That is very clearly based on how people dress, not based on any logic
So
needs.
here you don't use the idea of
Correct.
normative practice.
'Cause
It's
the-
only sorech.
Tzorech, exactly. The key word is tzorech as opposed to minhag, like what people are doing. Yes.
According to that question, was smoking considered a sorech and not just something that was considered mufunakim? I mean, because it was considered like a medical positivity.
Right. I'm not sure. Yeah. Yes.
What it's I mean, like, you can't go to work unshowered. You can't
Mhm.
in today's society, right? So, I mean,
You're not going to work on Yom Tov.
well, right, but does that define need?
Right. I'm not sure. It's.
I'm just gonna argue, there are doctors who say you could shower every other day, it's not like an everyday thing, I don't think that's.
But the expectation is there is no tolerance for body odor at the workplace, in the work, right? There is an expectation.
Yeah, body, right. But there are other ways of covering for body odor, and it depends on the person's body and depends on their sweat level, and without,
Depends on it, but many his bosses have had to deal with this issue. So, there is no tolerance for
Right. So would we argue that there is an absolute need nowadays? I hear. But again, keep in mind, different societies are different. Again, I'm going to go to Israel for a second. They don't shower as much as we do. They just don't. And they deal with body odor in a very different fashion. They still deal with it, but in a way that to us seems absurd, and we laugh at it, but it's the societal norm. It's a societal norm over there. Things are different. Yeah. Okay. So let's go one extra nikuda, one extra point. Even if we subscribe to those lenient opinions regarding shavach al nefesh, we must still address the rabbinic decree of gezerat habalanim. Remember, the Rambam says there's another issue over here, and that is there was a general decree against going to a bathhouse, right? So, and that told us that therefore there's a general decree against bathing your entire body, as accepted by the Shulchan Aruch. Here we find, right? So does this? So even if you say nowadays in Baltimore or whatever, normative, whatever, you have to showering daily or even every second day is very, very normal, right? I think that's fairly safe to say. However, even if it's normal and it gets around the Shavuot Kol issue, there is that decree of the Rambam's understanding of the decree, which applies on Yom Tov as well. Remember, he said you can't bathe your entire body, and that applies to Yom Tov as well. Here we find a number of arguments as to why it may not apply. First, one could argue that the decree only applies to a public bathhouse, but not to a private shower within one's home, a reality unknown to most people until the last century, right? In other words, when this decree was made, what was the decree? Was the decree you can't go to a bathhouse, or was the decree you cannot take a bath? Right? Big difference. And some argue, though, the decree was only that you can't go to a bathhouse, the entire decree never included taking a bath in a private home. The logic for such a claim is that the entire reason for the Gezerah is due to concern that the attendants would violate Shabbos for business gain, right? The whole issue wasn't that people are so into being clean. The issue was that the people are making money. They want to be open on Saturday. They want to be open on Shabbos, and they could be open on Shabbos. And now they have to be only open. So in order to keep them open on Shabbos, they have to lie a little bit. But if we're talking about a private citizen, you're not doing it for personal gain. I might do it for personal hygiene or personal comforts, but it's not the same. There's a logical distinction between the bathhouse where there's a concern that people are going to cheat and lie because of business as opposed to in one's home. Nevertheless, most poskim do not make such a distinction and understand that the decree would apply even in one's own home. Issue number 2 that we should keep in mind, lukewarm water. Another point of possible leniency could be the temperature of water. The Noda Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva Eiger were asked as to whether it would be permitted for women to immerse in a mikvah on Shabbos, in which the water is heated on Erev Shabbos, or whether this would be a violation of Gezeras Habalanim. Okay, this is actually a very interesting discussion that it comes up in every single mikvah across the world. And that is, mikvahs are open on Friday nights. Are you allowed to go into a mikvah? Are you allowed to go into a mikvah? Or is it part of the decree? There was a decree, you can't take a full-fledged bath, and there's a public bath. Can you do so? And the Noda Yehuda dismissed the argument that the Gezerah is not instituted in the case of mitzvah. Okay, so first he says it's a mitzvah, no problem. You can have a full-fledged hot water, it's fine. And most mikvahs rely on that. They don't change the temperature for Shabbos. But he suggests a different leniency, that the decree only applies to hot water and not to lukewarm water. And there are mikvahs that go ahead and cool off the mikvah a little bit. They don't make it cold, and that would be Terrible. But they go ahead and they make it a little bit less than really hot, a little bit lukewarm, to go ahead and say that's not part of this decree. And based on this, if one showers with lukewarm water, perhaps the leniency of Noda Yehuda would apply, right? So we see from here that the decree was only for hot water. And therefore, if you got around Shava Lakal by saying that nowadays showering is a normative practice, but you have this other decree of bathing in a bathhouse, and you want to say that it does apply to a private home, but the Noda Yehuda says that that decree is only hot water. But if it's less than hot water, it's lukewarm, okay, hard to define exactly where, okay, but it's not such hot water, then the decree wouldn't apply. And many people take this into practice and say, when you want to shower in Yom Tov, one of the best methods of doing so is to not use such hot water, to use lukewarm water, and then it would not be an issue. Yes?
What about Hasidim, the men who go to the mikvah on Shabbos day?
So they rely on the first point that the Noda Yehuda said, which is that it's a mitzvah, that if they're doing this daily, then it's a mitzvah, and that's what they rely upon. Yeah.
It says he dismisses the argument that the Gezerah was not instituted in case of a mitzvah.
So this is the argument that Gzera was not instituted in the case of mitzvah. Oh, you're right. Sorry. I'm sorry. Excuse me. You're right. The Noda Yehuda dismisses it. There's others, but he's arguing with other post-game. I apologize. The Noda Yehuda does not, so I just want to say things in the name of the right person. Noda Yehuda does not agree to the mitzvah approach. There are other post-game who do take this mitzvah approach, and that explains why many mikvahs do not lower the temperature, why Hasidim go into the mikvah. But you're right. The Noda Yehuda does not adopt the mitzvah approach. He uses the leniency of lukewarm. Thank you. This is why I should read slower, right? Okay. Mitzta'er. Okay. One more thing. Another argument for leniency is based on the notion of mitzta'er, which means one who experiences discomfort. Rabbi Akiva Eger argues that even if a certain malacha is not shav l'kol nefesh, the sages did not institute a decree against it if it causes discomfort. Okay, so although let's go back to where we started. We said, ochel nefesh is what's allowed. I'm allowed to heat up water to eat. I'm not allowed to heat up water to bathe, but I can if I have the principle of mitoch. And if it's something which could be done for a food purpose, I could do for another purpose. And if I could heat up the water, but it has to be shav l'kol, it has to be universal. And even if you want to tell me that bathing my entire body is not shav l'kol, as Beis Hillel said, Rabbi Akiva Eger proves from elsewhere that when a person is in pain or discomfort, extreme or significant discomfort, then that principle of shav l'kol does not apply. And it would be an additional allowance that when a person is in distress, a person is very uncomfortable, then a person would be allowed to go ahead and do something which is otherwise prohibited, and we don't have to worry about it being universal. This opinion is accepted by the Mishnah Brura and Shmer Shabbos Kol Chas, among others. Although this argument could not be applied en masse, and we need to be evaluated for each person individually, it is fair to assume in the case of a 3-day Yom Tov, more people would fit into this category. Okay, so this last leniency is probably the most important one. You'd have to ask yourself a question, and this, I think, is anyone who wants to shower is probably in a situation of discomfort. I don't know, in other words, if you are in a category of a person who is uncomfortable by not showering, then the prohibition against showering does not apply to you, and you would therefore be allowed to shower. Again, what's the basis for this? The basis for this is that the whole prohibition would be because it's not shav l'kol. But we say even when it has to be shav l'kol, if there is discomfort, if there's mitzta'er, you're also allowed to do so. And this is what many people rely upon. Yes?
I remember recently someone, it's not someone who was uncomfortable, they just wanted to relax. And they're like, oh, people can have a shower then yesterday. It would feel good.
Right.
Like it would be oneg gather.
So there's what to rely upon. It wouldn't be this allowance, meaning that they'd have to be relying on the Prima Gadim who says that it's a mitoch principle. In other words, there's different levels. Let's come back to that point in a second. 2 more points. Even if we resolve the rabbinic decree of the bathhouse, we must still address the Ashkenazi minhag studied by the Magen Avraham not to bathe even in cold water on Shabbos, which we're going to discuss next week, God willing. The Shmer Shabbos Kol Chazar argues this minhag applies also to Yom Tov. Or Moshe Feinstein argues there's a difference between a bath and a shower. Okay, we'll come that paragraph we're going to have to come back to next week. Don't worry, I don't think any of you are showering in cold water, I imagine, although it's become pretty trendy, the ice baths, right? Okay, but the bottom line is that, fine, well, we could... So strict, right? Us Ashkenazim, we're terrible. Okay, conclusion. Okay, we'll come back to cold water next week, so this paragraph, I can't go through it quickly because we haven't really addressed this topic properly. The conclusion. Ashkenazi poskim disagree whether one may shower on Yom Tov in today's times based on our current norms of hygiene. The Penine Halacha, among others, are lenient, whereas Shmir Shabbos Kol Chasot, Tzitz Eliezer, and many other poskim are stringent. Many Sephardic poskim, such as Rav Vadia Yosef and Rav Shmuel Eliyahu, are lenient. Even Ashkenazi poskim who rule stringently would likely permit a cold or possibly even lukewarm shower in case of great discomfort. It would seem that the reticence of some Ashkenazi poskim to rule leniently, despite the change in hygiene, could be based on the fact that according to the Ramah, a possible Torah violation is at issue. Therefore, even the associated rabbinic decrees are viewed in a stricter fashion. The Sephardic authorities, on the other hand, follow the Rambam Shulchan Aruch and are not concerned with the Torah violation. Therefore, they may, because according to him, it's already only rabbinic. Therefore, they may be willing to adopt the lenient arguments when dealing with the rabbinic decree. Moreover, Sephardic practice permits, in principle, bathing cold water on Shabbos, which makes that aspect of the question more lenient as well. Okay, so bottom line, here are your levels. Ashkenazim in the room? I think we're all Ashkenazi? Yes. Okay, so there are those who say, bottom line is, you cannot use heated up water on Shabbos. Everyone agrees, on Yom Tov, you can wash your hands, for bread or whatever, with hot water, no question. If you want to wash your feet off, no question, you can use hot water from your tap. It's heating up water. Yeah, that's fine. No problem. Showering on Yom Tov. So there are different levels, okay? So there are those who say, still cannot be done. It cannot be done. There are others who say that it could be done if you have, let's say, lukewarm water, okay? That would be like your most ideal level, okay? There are others who say that even beyond that, there's still what to rely upon to use hot water because of the fact that it is something which is A, shava lakol, B, the decree of the bathhouses may not apply over here, and C, again, this is something which nowadays hygiene has changed, and therefore it's going to be allowed entirely. So if you were to ask me my personal, there is another level which I just mentioned. Rav Herschel Schechter says, do not use a piping hot water shower. Even if you take that most lenient view, everyone would say you should not use a piping hot shower. Why? Because I'm sure all of us, everyone takes showers in different degrees of heat, but those who like really, really, really hot showers, that is not shava lakol. That is unique. And therefore, even those who say you can use a hot water, you shouldn't use a piping hot water. So again, bottom line is we're dealing with potentially a biblical prohibition. So there's certainly room to be cautious. And those who do not want to shower on Yom Tov, they're certainly in good, we understand where they're coming from. We should completely understand that. If a person wants to shower on Yom Tov, there's certainly what to rely upon to use a lukewarm one. If a person's uncomfortable, if you're asking the question, you're often uncomfortable, you're in a state of discomfort and hard for you to go in public without showering, whatever it is, there is certainly what to rely upon to take a regular hot shower. It should not be piping hot water.
We're not talking about washing your hair.
We're not talking about washing your hair right now. We're talking about drawing right now, but God willing, we could review that another time. But right now, just the hot water itself. Yes?